The October morning rain drizzled softly on the windshield of the rented SUV parked outside Morningstar Grill number 14, a branch nestled in the misty and sparse town of Rockridge. The man behind the wheel looked no different than a casual traveler wearing an old plaid shirt, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low to partially hide a salt and pepper beard. But behind those rimless glasses was Ethan Rowe, the 47-year-old CEO of Morningstar Group, who had spent nearly 2 decades building an American traditional cuisine empire across the Northwest. This morning, he carried no laptop, no assistant by his side. Instead, he bore a false name, Walter Green, and a vague reason, backpacking while visiting his daughter. The Rockridge branch was not on any red alert lists for revenue or performance. On the contrary, reports from the regional manager showed all indicators were stable. Yet Ethan was used to reading the gaps between the numbers. The turnover rate at this branch was 3 times the system average, customer satisfaction ratings continuously declined, and what caught his attention most was a series of cold, distant employee feedback in the internal culture surveys like a harsh knocking echoing from an invisible wall. Ethan entered the cafe at exactly 7:35. The doorbell chimed gently amid the rich aroma of roasted coffee, smoky bacon, and pancakes cooking on the griddle. The space was cozy and familiar, but none of the staff showed much enthusiasm. A young hostess with hastily tied hair and a name tag reading Lena quietly led him to a table near the kitchen entrance, an ideal spot to observe everything unnoticed. On the wall, the Employee of the Month board still displayed August's photo, although it was already mid-October. Hidden corners of the floor were yet to be cleaned properly, and Lena's uniform lacked the standard badge small details. But Ethan always believed neglect started with such seemingly insignificant things. He ordered coffee and began watching the morning's rhythm. 3 servers divided the dining area among themselves, but their speed and attitude differed strangely. 2 young men, neatly dressed, chatted leisurely near the bar, unhurried and responsible for only a few tables. Meanwhile, a young woman with her brown hair tied neatly, wearing a slightly worn uniform and a name tag Jasmine, moved non-stop carrying 3 plates in her left hand, pouring coffee with her right, her focused yet friendly expression natural and unforced. Fatigue showed under her eyes, yet she smiled genuinely as she approached his table. "Good morning. Sorry to keep you waiting. Black coffee, right?" she asked softly, her hands steady as she poured hot coffee into a ceramic cup. Ethan nodded, playing the role of a retiree embarking on a cross-country journey. Jasmine suggested the driver's breakfast, 3 eggs, bacon, sausage, pancakes, and fries with a light joke that made him chuckle. "Enough fuel to go another 300 miles, she said. Ethan agreed with a nod. As she left, he began memorizing every detail. The pace of service, the glances from co-workers toward her, and especially how Calvin Brooks, the branch manager, stood watching Jasmine from afar and smiled at Trevor, a young man sharing the same surname. That smile tightened Ethan's stomach. He had come to find operational faults, but what was unfolding resembled a carefully organized system of favoritism. Today, he came for breakfast. But this breakfast might just be the start of a larger purge. Jasmine returned with a neatly arranged tray, the food perfectly matching the images in Morningstar's training manual: golden soft-boiled eggs, evenly crispy bacon, pancakes topped with the right amount of butter and syrup. Ethan smiled in approval, not only at the quality but also at the rare consistency shown by a frontline employee clearly exhausted. He started a light conversation, following service protocol, gentle inquiries opening a personal story. Jasmine responded politely, her smile carrying a hint of skepticism but no defensiveness. When Ethan noted that she seemed to be serving more tables than her 2 colleagues, Jasmine's gaze shifted briefly. She replied in a steady voice, as if repeating the same answer to herself every day. "Some areas are always busier in the morning. The schedule is set the night before. I just follow it." Ethan didn't push further, but he had never seen a server handle 12 tables during peak hours, while the others managed only 4. His attention sharpened when he saw that when customers at Jasmine's tables paid by card, it was Trevor, the young man idly standing by the counter, who came over to swipe cards and finalize bills. Once, then twice. When a third transaction was also handled by Trevor, Ethan's suspicion grew. Something was amiss in the tip-sharing process here. When Jasmine came back to pour more coffee, Ethan probed gently. "Morning tips must be pretty good, right?" he said, like someone who knew the business. Jasmine hesitated, gripping the handle of the thermos tighter. "Actually, morning shifts are the worst for tips." Her voice lowered, almost enough for him to hear alone. Then, with a smile as if joking, she added something that made Ethan tense up. "And not everyone on the shift gets a share." Before he could ask more, a family walked in, and Lena directed them to the area Jasmine covered, even though tables in other sections were still available. Ethan quietly watched Jasmine's figure fade behind the kitchen door, his mind starting to piece together the facts. A pattern was emerging, a system seemingly designed so that certain people accessed privileges such as digital POS access, while others were forced to settle for empty promises of cash tip redistribution at day's end. He ate quietly, observing more than speaking. Through the kitchen window, he saw Calvin, the manager, talking with Trevor. They laughed and pointed toward the dining area. No one mentioned Jasmine, but the way they looked made Ethan clearly feel she was not considered part of the inner circle. This was not only ethically wrong, but under federal law, it could constitute discrimination and fraud in tip sharing. When Jasmine returned to process payment, Ethan pretended to need information about the area for a daughter about to move in, just to keep her there a few more minutes. She nodded slightly, pulling out a small notebook hidden in her apron pocket, pretending to jot down a new menu, as if to justify lingering longer at the table. "How long have you worked here?" Ethan asked softly. 3 years now. Started in my last year of high school, then went to the local college." She smiled proudly, then her gaze darkened. "Just 1 semester left to finish my accounting degree if I can still afford it." Her voice trailed off, as if afraid to hear herself say it. In that moment, Ethan understood that this young woman was not just working to survive, she was fighting not to be left behind. And the system pushing her to the margins was the very system for which he held the highest responsibility. What he had just witnessed was no longer a sign of weak management, it was a deliberately exploitative model. And Jasmine, unknowingly, had just handed him the first clue to overturn the whole truth. Ethan sat quietly at the table for 10 more minutes after Jasmine left, the coffee in his hand cooling down while his mind boiled with thoughts. What he had just heard was not merely a complaint about tips. It was a discreet accusation, subtle enough to avoid notice, but courageous enough for him to glimpse a part of a system rotting from within. Jasmine had no idea that the cheerful driver she referred to was actually the CEO of the entire Morningstar Group, and that made her story all the more credible and genuine. Ethan left the cafe, leaving a $20 bill on the receipt and another folded note cleverly hidden beneath the bottom of the coffee cup, a place only those who thoroughly clear tables would find. He wasn't sure if Jasmine would ever see it, but he knew one thing: she deserved everything she had never been paid. The rain had stopped when he unlocked his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Clara, I need you at Rockridge immediately, within an hour." The woman's voice on the other end didn't ask why, only replied with 3 familiar words: "I'm on my way." Clara Jensen, Morningstar's head of internal investigations, was not easily startled. But when Ethan said he needed the entire POS records, camera footage, and internal complaint reports from branch number 14 for the past 6 months, she understood this was no minor operational violation. An hour and a half later, the meeting room at Rockridge Inn had transformed into a temporary command center. Clara, with her 2 colleagues, Luis and Dana, opened their laptops and connected to the central system. Ethan, now out of disguise, wearing a simple gray shirt and slacks but still keeping his salt and pepper beard in case he had to return to the cafe, stood behind Clara. Show me the time logs and POS role assignments for the past 6 months, he said. Clara scrolled and pointed to a column. Calvin created a new employee category called support staff in the system, not in the official manual. She added the names. Jasmine Taylor was in that group, along with 7 others. Anyone in the support group is not granted digital tip handling rights. All transactions automatically funnel to the main employee on shift. Ethan tightened his fist. Let me guess. Trevor Brooks is that main employee. Clara nodded. Correct. The system defaults 67% of morning shift tips to Trevor. 3 others share the remainder. All are trusted by Calvin. Luis switched his screen to show lunch break surveillance footage from 3 weeks ago. Calvin was counting money in a tin box. No sound, but the image was clear. He was distributing cash, giving Trevor noticeably more. A girl who looked like Jasmine stood before him, pointing at the box in frustration. Calvin waved her off like swatting a fly. Trevor laughed loudly. Can we get audio? Ethan asked. No mic in the dining area, Luis answered. But the data doesn't lie. Another screen showed yesterday's data. Customers paid a total of $847 in digital tips, but only $412 was distributed to employees' accounts, with Trevor receiving $178. Where's the other $435? Ethan asked, his voice cold as steel. Clara pulled up a bank statement. Here. Calvin opened an LLC 3 months after coming to this branch. Every week, a small amount is deposited into that account, matching the unallocated tip discrepancy. Ethan didn't need to hear more to know what was happening. This was no longer favoritism. It was organized theft. And the ones robbed most brazenly were those too busy to speak up or too exhausted to realize they were being taken advantage of. He looked at Jasmine's picture frozen on the screen, showing her arguing helplessly, and he knew. It was time to give a voice back to people like her. Ethan returned to Morningstar Grill number 14 on Thursday morning, dressed in a carefully adjusted disguise. Today, Walter Green no longer looked like a lost retired driver, but resembled a middle-class regular on vacation, wearing a clean shirt, new jeans, and a leather wallet, holding a Morningstar membership card. Accompanying him was Clara, playing the role of a successful daughter, taking her father out for breakfast. Her smart outfit, round glasses, and calm demeanor made her a perfect fit. She looked like any woman chatting with her father on a regular morning, but in her wallet was a recording device designed by the legal team ready to capture every conversation at the table, part of a plan meticulously prepared overnight. The familiar chime of the doorbell rang as they entered. The receptionist was a different, colder face today, guiding them to the old corner table where Ethan had first observed Jasmine. Everything looked the same. Dim lighting, the aroma of coffee mingled with the hiss of the kitchen. But to Ethan, the atmosphere now held the tone of a stage about to reach its climax. He noticed Calvin standing near the cash register, eyes constantly darting to the dining area like a predator guarding his territory. Trevor, still relaxed in his neatly pressed uniform, chatted amiably with an elderly customer near the window. And Jasmine, as usual, weaved through the tables, the coffee pot almost an extension of her arm. Walter? Jasmine's voice held surprise. Ethan turned with a warm smile. Couldn't resist your pancakes. This time I even brought my daughter along. Clara followed perfectly. My father hasn't stopped praising this place, so I had to come see for myself. Jasmine smiled, but her eyes flickered briefly when she noticed Calvin watching. It's a pleasure. But today, Trevor will be your main server. We have a rotation policy for regulars, she hesitated. I can pour coffee for you two while you wait for him. Ethan nodded without adding anything. He understood well that this wasn't a rotation, it was a deliberate arrangement. When Jasmine left, Calvin approached Trevor, exchanging subtle glances and gestures. Trevor approached the table with a rehearsed politeness. Hello, I'm Trevor, pleased to serve you today. Jasmine told me you two are regulars. Ethan nodded, fully in character. I heard about the new membership card program, just signed up, very convenient. Trevor's eyes lit up. Yes, it's great 5% discount, quick payment, and tips can be transferred directly. Ethan smiled. I'll use it today. And here's an extra $50 tip. The good service deserves recognition. Trevor paused briefly, masking his surprise with a polite smile. Of course, all tips are evenly distributed among the shift. Ethan nodded quietly. Meanwhile, Clara silently pressed the button to record the entire conversation. After the meal, when Trevor brought the card reader, Ethan slowly handed over the card, making sure Clara caught the screen's angle. "The card and $50 tip, please," he said calmly. Trevor nodded. "Right away." An hour later, in the temporary meeting room at the hotel, the screen displayed detailed transactions. Employee ID processing the payment, Trevor Brooks. Employee ID receiving the tip, also Trevor. Jasmine, the actual server, did not appear in the allocation chain. Luis marked the transaction, extracted the full system log. "Got him," he said simply. Clara nodded, her gaze colder than usual. Ethan needed no more words. The trap had snapped shut. Friday morning began with a strange ray of sunshine after days of gray rain, as if the sky was signaling that something was about to change. At 8:45, 3 black SUVs quietly rolled into the parking lot of Morningstar Grill number 14, parking right in front of the main entrance. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was still bustling with regular customers, the clinking of cutlery, and the faint aroma of pancakes in the air. Jasmine was pouring coffee at table 6 when the glass doors opened, and the noise instantly dropped as if someone flipped an invisible mute switch. 4 people entered first, dressed neatly in office attire, carrying tablets and briefcases. Behind them was a woman with her gray hair neatly tied back, a stern face, and finally a tall man in a charcoal suit, eyes bright behind thin glasses. Jasmine froze mid-lobby, nearly dropping the coffee pot. That man, undeniably, was Walter. But Walter today was no longer wearing a baseball cap or carrying the demeanor of a retired driver. He stood there like a commanding general, cold, determined, and fully in control. From behind the counter, Calvin stepped out, a forced smile appearing on his pale face. "Mr. Rowe, we weren't informed." Ethan didn't let him finish. "Of course not," he replied calmly. "If we had known, you'd have scheduled differently, erased some transactions, maybe even staged a fake meeting to cover it up." Calvin froze, face turning pale. Trevor, standing near the register, turned to find an escape route but was blocked by one of Clara's associates. "You're not going anywhere," she said softly but firmly. Ethan stepped into the center of the restaurant, facing all employees and customers. "I am Ethan Rowe, CEO of Morningstar Group. Today, we are conducting an emergency inspection at this branch. All breakfast today is free. Please continue dining. We just need a few minutes." He signaled an associate to distribute vouchers to every table. Calvin approached, trying to salvage the situation with a friendly tone. "If I'd known you were coming, we would have prepared better. Maybe there's some misunderstanding about internal policies." Ethan didn't turn back. "The assistant classification policy doesn't exist in our manual. The POS system is not allowed to automatically route all tips to one person just because they have a primary employee code. And it certainly can't be a coincidence if that person is the manager's nephew." The whole restaurant fell silent. He pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase, reading clearly. "Over the past 3 months, the system shows $18,742.63 in digital tips have been misallocated. That money didn't reach the people who actually served like Jasmine Taylor here, but was transferred into the account of Trevor Brooks, then partially funneled into a shell company named Brooks Service LLC, registered under Calvin Brooks." Trevor turned pale. Calvin looked at his nephew, then around the room searching for an excuse. "It's an internal incentive strategy to keep the core team bonded." Ethan cut him off, his voice for the first time revealing his anger. "I call that organized theft." He turned to the customers and staff. "From this moment, Calvin Brooks and Trevor Brooks are terminated from Morningstar Group. The company will initiate legal proceedings for fraud and embezzlement. Both will be detained here until legal processes are complete." 2 security officers stepped forward, placing firm but gentle hands on their shoulders. Calvin struggled, shouting, "You can't do this! I built this place from nothing." Ethan looked him straight in the eyes, calmly. "You built nothing. You inherited an honest team and exploited them to the bone." Amid the sea of staring eyes, Jasmine stood silently, tears in her eyes. She whispered to herself, "You're not a driver, are you?" Ethan turned back, his eyes softening. "No, but everything I've seen here is real, and you are the reason I stayed to change it all." 1 month after that fateful morning, Ethan Rowe returned to Morningstar Grill number 14. This time he was no longer in disguise. No baseball cap, no fake beard, no story about a daughter seeking a new home. He was simply himself in a simple suit, without a secretary or entourage. When the doorbell chimed, he no longer stepped into a place shrouded in the dust of neglect, but into a bright, warm space where the morning sunlight streamed through freshly cleaned windows, casting light on neatly arranged tables, newly replanted small pots, and genuinely smiling faces, not forced at all. On the screen hung near the kitchen door were photos and full names of each morning shift member, along with a public chart showing the tip distribution from the previous day. A new icon had been added to the system, a team trust indicator showing the level of employee satisfaction with internal fairness. No one needed to say it, but Ethan knew that was Jasmine. She approached no longer the tired server with dark circles under her eyes and a faded uniform, but a young manager in a crisp new uniform with a name tag reading, "Jasmine Taylor, Branch Manager." She greeted him with a confident smile, yet not proud. "Good morning, Mr. Rowe. Your usual table is still here if you want to sit back down. The morning rush doesn't start for another 20 minutes, so I can sit with you for a while." Ethan nodded and sat down at the old table, where not long ago he had quietly observed a decaying system no one dared speak out against. Now, before him was a new operating model, printed and publicly posted shift schedules, each employee with a personal login card for the POS system, tip data updated in real time, displayed at the counter for anyone to verify. Ethan didn't ask who proposed these changes. He knew Jasmine had redesigned the entire process with the internal investigation team. And not just for Branch 14. Over the past month, the new system had been piloted in 16 other branches. "Have you started your final semester yet?" Ethan asked as Jasmine poured coffee, a habit she maintained every time he visited. She nodded, her eyes brightening. "With the company scholarship plus the restitution for stolen tips, I not only cover my tuition but also paid off all my student debt." Ethan smiled softly, not only because she achieved her dream, but because she was becoming the role model he wanted every frontline leader to follow. Steadfast, knowledgeable on the ground, and brave enough to speak the truth even when no one knew they were listening. "What about the old staff?" he asked, glancing toward the counter. Jasmine replied evenly, without evasion. "Except for the two directly involved, everyone stayed, and they are growing. The new receptionist was just promoted to assistant manager. One of the two chefs signed up for an advanced food safety course." She paused briefly. The biggest change isn't the software but the trust. Since the anonymous hotline to headquarters was implemented, people no longer fear speaking out." Ethan nodded. The anonymous reporting system he had implemented completely cut out filtering by branch managers. Now every report was encrypted and handled by an independent team. Silence was no longer a weapon of the powerful. It was eliminated by a server who once only quietly took notes and poured coffee. Before leaving Morningstar Grill number 14, Ethan walked around the kitchen, not to inspect, but to shake hands with each staff member. The atmosphere here was no longer the hesitation or awkwardness he had sensed on his first visit, but a new energy, confidence, relief, and quiet pride. Firm handshakes, eyes that no longer avoided contact. A young employee, while wiping a table, secretly pulled out a small notebook, folded a piece of paper, and slipped it into Ethan's front pocket as he passed by. No words were spoken, but he knew this was a sign that trust had begun to revive. Back at the hotel, Ethan unfolded the paper. Inside was a copy of the latest work schedule, marked with unusual hours for 3 newly hired employees, all personally connected to a temporary supervisor transferred from another branch during the transition period. The last handwritten line read carefully, Unclear if coincidence, but the software failed to log data during these hours. Ethan refolded the paper, placed it in his file folder. The overhaul was not just about addressing a single fraud case, but about exposing an entire system long assumed that silence was the rule of survival. And now, those who once bowed their heads were gradually learning to raise them to watch and to speak out. That afternoon, Ethan arrived at the Morningstar Group headquarters. In a small conference room with the internal investigation team, he opened a system map of branches and circled 10 random locations. I want anonymous inspections, following the same process we used at Branch 14. No prior notice, no traces left behind. If there's no problem, fine. But if there is, I want to hear it from the employees, not from fabricated KPIs. Within 3 weeks, 7 branches underwent covert inspections. 2 showed mild signs of tip system manipulation, mostly tricks with alternating POS logins, but insufficient to be criminal fraud. One branch, number 23 at Elmsdale, revealed an early version of the scam seen at Rockridge, a POS machine controlled solely by an assistant manager who was also a close friend of the branch manager, who had altered temporary employee classifications with a few lines of internal system code. "So, this model has spread," Clara said when presenting the final report to Ethan. "It's not just Calvin Brooks's problem." Ethan didn't reply immediately. He gazed out the window where the last daylight streaks spilled across the courtyard, reflecting on the gleaming glass doors. "The real sickness isn't just a few greedy individuals," he said slowly. "It lies in mirrors left uncleaned for too long. When no one reflects actions back, we let injustice survive and multiply." He looked up at the team. "From today, I want all internal complaint reports forwarded directly to the chairman's office, no intermediaries. We will have a dedicated portal, anonymous, secure, and tracking feedback in real time. Any obstruction, even delay, will be treated as interference with the investigation." He looked at Clara. "And I want a retraining program for all mid-level managers, not only on procedures, but on leadership ethics. Anyone who fails will not continue." Clara nodded. She understood this campaign had gone beyond just dealing with a problematic branch. It was a declaration of war against apathy, shirking responsibility, and a commitment to people like Jasmine that their silence would no longer be forgotten. 6 weeks after the day Rockridge changed, Ethan Rowe received an invitation to an employee meeting at Morningstar Grill number 14 for the first time in the history of the restaurant chain, a meeting organized proactively by the staff themselves, not to hear announcements from headquarters, but to give feedback on their experiences. On the invitation, Jasmine's handwriting read, "We just want you to see with your own eyes the trust has not only returned but is flourishing." Ethan didn't hesitate. He postponed all his meetings, requested to come alone without company car, bodyguards, or CEO name tag. When he stepped into that familiar restaurant again, no one was surprised. Some young employees waved, the chef nodded from the kitchen door, and Jasmine was adjusting the microphone on the wooden podium at the left corner. The meeting began with simple stories about regular customers returning after months away, about an intern who was retained as a full-time employee, and even about the new chef proposing vegetarian dishes to the menu. Then came Jasmine's turn. She stood tall, her gaze no longer hesitant as before. "Everyone, I know we have been through a tough time, but what moves me the most is not that this month's revenue increased by 12%, but that someone dared to stand up and say, 'I see something wrong,' and then others responded, 'Me too.' We no longer bow our heads thinking we are insignificant. We have learned that sometimes it only takes one person brave enough to speak the truth for the whole system to listen." The room applauded, but Ethan did not. He quietly watched that young woman who once poured him coffee with trembling hands from exhaustion, now leading a whole team without a command arrow. When the meeting ended, Jasmine approached and handed him a thick dossier. "I'm not sure if you've had time to review everything, so we printed a hard copy. This is the project we, together with the audit department, drafted on the tip-sharing model by shift and area, with an internal monitoring system, real-time dashboards, and transparent reconciliation sheets. If you find it reasonable, we hope to pilot it in several more branches." Ethan flipped through the pages and realized this project was not only well-organized, but profound. It went beyond technical details and began with a philosophy that servers should not live by the uncertainty of customer generosity, but by fairness within their workplace. He looked up at her, his eyes softening. "I will present this project to the board of directors, but I have a small request when it's implemented. Can you join the monitoring team?" Jasmine looked surprised for a moment, then nodded. "I'm ready." The next morning, Ethan presented the project at headquarters, and within 2 weeks, 6 branches were selected as pilot sites for the Sunrise Tip Equality Program. Each received updated software and a new regional manager retrained in leadership ethics. Every week, Ethan received a summary email from the internal monitoring system lists of feedback, reports, and suggestions, mostly from young employees who had never spoken up before. Each time he read them, he recalled the small piece of paper a boy slipped into his pocket that day, or Jasmine's quiet nod when admitting she had lost $600 without knowing where to report it. For Ethan, that was when he understood more than ever. The most important things in any organization don't lie in the logo or achievement boards hung in the lobby, but in the silent courage of those seemingly smallest people, those who keep the flame alive with faith, not by position. As the Sunrise Tip Equality System gradually went into operation, Ethan Rowe quietly monitored every metric from the 18th floor office at headquarters, yet it was the small details in the weekly reports that occupied his mind the most. A note from the Brookfield branch read, "Employees refuse to use shared login credentials, requesting individual cards." A remark from Elmsdale said, 3 anonymous complaints in the first week after tip distribution was made public. A brief email from Cedar Glen suggested, "Add a confirmation button for employees before locking the tip allocation sheet." These changes, no orders given, no instructions in any manual, were signs of a new culture emerging, where fairness was no longer just a slogan on the wall, but a living practice every single day. Still, in a report from Nebraska, Ethan paused longer than usual. A simple line: "There are discrepancies in the transaction history of customer cards, tip amounts don't fully show when reconciled with invoices." The report came through the emergency feedback system, accompanied by an anonymous note. "I'm not sure what's wrong, but this looks similar to what Jasmine discovered." Just one sentence, but Ethan immediately called Clara. "Get me all POS data from branch number 9 in Nebraska for the past 60 days, including modification logs and the list of employees assigned to the card readers." Less than 3 hours later, the investigation team found an unusual pattern. During several morning shifts, the employee conducting transactions was employee A, but the final tip recipient code belonged to employee B. There was no system error or code duplication, but the tip recipient code was changed exactly 12 minutes after the transaction by an access from a management account. Further activity history checks revealed that these accesses occurred while employee B was off shift, even absent from the store. "The account is being exploited from behind the scenes," Clara explained while presenting the report. "Someone is using access rights to swap tip recipient codes after customers leave." Ethan looked at the screen, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. "We thought the Rockridge case was the peak, but it turns out it was just the tip of the iceberg." He paused, voice lowering. "And that iceberg is spreading because for years, no one bothered to check the depths." The very next morning, he traveled to Nebraska, this time without any disguise. He entered the restaurant as a guest, but also as a witness. The employee at the counter was a young woman with a bright face and neat uniform. She greeted him without recognizing who he was, but her eyes betrayed a bit of tension. Ethan sat near the window and observed. Within 20 minutes, he clearly saw the old pattern repeat. Only one person had access to the POS machine, while other employees had to manually record orders and hand them over later. When Ethan deliberately forgot his wallet with a customer card inside, he heard a voice behind him say, "Let me handle the transaction for him." The voice wasn't from a server, but from a person wearing an assistant manager badge. Ethan smiled softly. He pulled out his phone, opened the Sunrise internal app, and tapped the Start Live Monitoring button. When the small green light appeared in the corner of the screen, he knew every data line from the next transaction would be recorded. Impossible to delete, or alter. This time, he didn't need to impersonate anyone. He just needed to watch and let the justice system that Jasmine helped build do the rest. The morning after leaving Nebraska, Ethan Rowe made no announcements, held no meetings, and issued no public statements. All he did was send an electronic order to headquarters. Activate extended investigation protocol as per Rockridge. Extract data from the next 15 randomly selected branches. Prioritize locations with low employee feedback but unusually high tip revenue. He knew well that if a system built on silence could be exploited, then simply letting the truth be heard would cause it to collapse from within. A few days later, at the annual Morningstar Group conference, Ethan took the stage not as CEO but as a storyteller. He did not display growth charts or record-breaking quarterly numbers. Instead, he projected a single image, a photo capturing Jasmine Taylor standing alone behind the counter, clutching an order book, eyes fixed on Doug and Ryan in the video exposing the fraud. She didn't know the cameras were recording. She only knew she could no longer remain silent. "This is the person who saved an entire system without even knowing it," Ethan said, his voice calm, yet every word striking like a silent hammer. "She has no title, no power, no protection, but she has the most important thing, courage." He looked around at the executive team. "We designed an organization that can print a new menu within 36 hours, open a new branch in 3 weeks, but it takes years to hear a cry for help from the person standing right at the checkout." After his speech, Ethan accepted no flowers, no congratulations. He left the hall as quietly as he arrived, but the following week, the entire system began receiving a new POS software update internally named the Cassie Protocol. Each transaction now requires dual confirmation from both the server and the payment processor. Whenever there's a discrepancy in tip allocation between the two, the system automatically sends an alert to the audit team. Every employee, even those on probation, receives an immutable personal ID that management cannot alter. 3 months later, Jasmine Taylor was invited to join the company-wide Human Resources Advisory Board. She appeared in the internal podcast, sharing her journey from a server who once thought a college degree was out of reach. On her graduation day, Ethan sat quietly in the back row, applauding when her name was called and quietly turned away when he saw her tears. For Ethan, victory wasn't about bringing down the greedy, but about the moments when he could walk into any restaurant and no longer see tired, evasive eyes. Instead, he saw genuine nods, heartfelt greetings, and transparent systems where hardworking people are truly seen, not through slogans, but through fairness in every card swipe, every data entry, every tip dollar. When a reporter asked him in a year-end interview, "What do you think is the most important factor in a successful restaurant?" Ethan smiled gently. "3 things," he replied. "Trust, dignity, and the courage to stand up even when you think no one is watching." He paused, took a sip of coffee, then added slowly as if writing the closing lines of a long chapter. "Because sometimes the most important ingredients in a restaurant aren't on the menu." In the world of service, where everything revolves around speed and efficiency, sometimes the most essential things are forgotten: fairness, courage, and the right to speak up. The story of Jasmine and Ethan is not just an internal investigation or a journey exposing a fraudulent system, but a testament that an organization is truly strong only when it dares to face the truth and puts people above numbers. As an expert in management, I believe corporate culture does not begin with meetings or KPI charts, but starts with how we listen to those on the front lines. If you also believe integrity still has a place in business, please like this video to help spread the story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss these powerful transformations, and leave a comment with the phrase, "Speak up if you support courageous people like Jasmine." See you in the next stories, where the truth always has a voice.